Letter to Nicolas the Solitary from St. Mark the Ascetic. Since you have already become much concerned about your salvation and have been asking yourself how you can live a life according to God, you have consulted us and told us about yourself, how with great labor and burning desire you wish to cleave to God through a strict way of life, through self-control and much hardship, through vigils and intense prayer. You spoke of the conflicts and the swarm of carnal passions stirred up in your bodily nature and aroused against the soul by the law of sin that fights against the law of our intellect. Romans chapter 7 verse 23. You deplored the fact that you are especially troubled by the passions of anger and desire, and you asked for some method and words of advice indicating what ascetic practices you should adopt to overcome these two destructive passions. At that time we talked with you directly and suggested, as far as we could, various ideas to help you, explaining how the soul should engage in ascetic efforts with understanding and spiritual knowledge in accordance with the gospel, and how, living by faith and helped by grace, it can overcome the evils that spring up in the heart, and especially the two passions just mentioned. Our soul should fight most vigorously and continually against those passions to which it is especially liable through prepossession and habit, until it has subdued the non-spiritual and uncontrolled operations of vice to which up till now it has been subject. For the soul is carried away captive through its inward ascent to the thoughts with which it is constantly and sinfully occupied. We are now physically separated from you for a short time, in presence but not in heart. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 17. For we have gone to live in the desert with the true ascetics of Christ. It is our hope that we, too, may in some small extent pursue the spiritual way in company with our brethren who are fighting against the hostile energies and bravely resisting the passions. We are trying to shake off laxity, sloth and laxity, to free ourselves from negligence, and to make every effort to conform to God's will. So we have decided to write you a few words of advice for the benefit of your soul. In this modest letter, you will find some of the things we mentioned to you in our talk. We ask you to read it carefully, as though we were ourselves present, so that it may help you spiritually. This, my son, is how you should begin your life according to God. You should continually and unceasingly call to mind all the blessings which God in His love has bestowed upon you in the past, and still bestows for the salvation of your soul. You must not let forgetfulness of evil or laziness make you grow unmindful of these many and great blessings, and so pass the rest of your life uselessly and ungratefully. For this kind of continual recollection, pricking the heart like a spur, moves it constantly to confession and humility, to thanksgiving with a contrite soul, and to all forms of sincere effort, repaying God through its virtue and holiness. In this way, the heart meditates constantly and conscientiously on the words from the Psalms. What shall I give to the Lord in return for all His benefits towards me? Psalms 116, verse 12. Thus the soul recalls the blessings of God's love, which it has received from the moment it came into existence, how it has often been delivered from dangers, how in spite of having often fallen by its own free choice into great evils and sins, it was not justly given up to destruction and death at the hands of the spirits of deception, and how God with long suffering overlooked its offenses and protected it, awaiting its return. It also recalled that although through the passions it had become the willing servant of hostile and malicious spirits, he sustained it, guarding it and in all ways providing for it, and finally that he guided it with a clear sign to the path of salvation, and inspired it with the love of the ascetic life. So he gave it the strength gladly to abandon the world and all the deceitfulness of worldly pleasure, adorning it with the angelic habit of the monastic order, and providing for it to be received by holy men in an organized brotherhood. Can any man consciously call these things to mind and not be moved, always, to contrition of heart? Having so many pledges from past blessings, will he not always have firm hope, in spite of the fact that he himself has so far done nothing good? He will say to himself, though I have done nothing good and have committed many sins before him, living in uncleanness of the flesh, and indulging in many other vices, yet he did not deal with me according to my sins, or reward me according to my iniquities. Psalm 103, verse 10. But gave me all these gifts of grace for my salvation. If then, from now onwards, I give myself completely to his service, living in all purity and acquiring all virtues, how many holy and spiritual gifts will he not grant me, strengthening me in every good work, guiding and leading me aright? If a man always thinks in this way and does not forget God's blessings, he encourages and urges himself on to the practice of every virtue and of every righteous work, always ready, always eager to do the will of God. Therefore, my dear son, since through the grace of Christ you possess natural understanding, consider always to occupy your mind with such meditation. Do not let yourself be overcome by destructive forgetfulness, or by the laziness which paralyzes the intellect and turns it away from life. Do not allow ignorance, the cause of all evils, to darken your thinking. Do not be lured by the corrosive vice of negligence. Do not be seduced by sensual pleasure or defeated by gluttony. Do not let your intellect be taken prisoner by lust through assenting to sexual thoughts, defiling yourself inwardly. Do not be overcome by the anger which causes you to hate your brother, and for some pathetic reason to inflict and suffer pain, leading you to store up malicious thoughts against your neighbor, and to turn away from pure prayer. Anger enslaves the intellect, and makes you regard your brother with bestial cruelty. It fetters the conscience with uncontrolled impulses of the flesh, and surrenders you for a time to be chastened by the evil spirits to whom you have yielded. Eventually your intellect, at a loss where to turn, is overwhelmed by dejection and laziness, and forfeits all its spiritual progress. Then in deep humility it sets out once more on the path of salvation. Laboring much in prayer and all-night vigils, it uproots the causes of evil within itself through humility and confession before God and our neighbor. In this way it begins to regain the state of watchfulness, and, illumined with divine grace and understanding of the Gospels, it perceives that no one can become a true Christian unless he gives himself up completely to the cross in a spirit of humility and self-denial, and makes himself lower than all, letting himself be trampled underfoot, insulted, despised, wronged, ridiculed, and mocked, and all this he must endure joyfully for the Lord's sake, not claiming for himself in return any human advantages, glory, honor, or praise, or the pleasures of food, drink, or clothes. Such are the contests, and such the prizes that lie before us. How long then Shall we mock ourselves by pretending to be devout, serving the Lord with hypocrisy, being thought one thing by men, but clearly seen to be quite different by Him who knows our secrets? Other people regard us as saintly, but we are still savage. Although we have indeed an outward form of godliness, we do not possess its power before God. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5. Other people regard us as virginal and chaste, but in the sight of Him who knows our secrets, we are inwardly defiled by our assent to thoughts of unchastity, and made filthy by activity of the passions. In spite of this, thanks to our seeming asceticism, we attract men's praises and are bowled over and blinded in our intellect.